TIFU. Accidentally snuck onto a US military base thanks to confusing Apple Maps directions. Once upon a time, or about 1 hour ago to be specific, Apple Maps tried to get my sisters and our friends' Canadian asses unalived, or at the very least detained and deported, on what was supposed to be a very innocent road trip through the southern United States. Cold sweat smile. We had planned a quick stop at the Armed Forces Museum outside of Gulfport, Mississippi on our way to New Orleans from our starting point in Nashville. Turns out by following Apple's suspiciously nonsensical GPS directions, we unknowingly snuck onto the Camp Shelby military base. Upside down face, we were eventually stopped partway through our browse through the museum by an armed constable who was simultaneously mindblown and amused as fuck at how we managed to even get onto base undetected, much less into the museum that was coincidentally open for the first time in several weeks. Thankfully, he was very understanding when he had us walk him through how Apple Maps managed to give us directions that somehow bypassed their visitors center and security checkpoints and every set of eyes on the way to the museum in the middle of the base. Apparently, they had officers looking everywhere for us before they realized we were just a bunch of bumbling, clueless Canadians perusing the museum. Cue an armed escort back to the security checkpoint, where they ran our IDs and did background checks, and we were subsequently informed by our new friend that the US government had closed its bases to the public and any non-military US citizens because of the Ukraine-Russia conflict, because allowing civilians and foreign nationals on base is a potential threat to national security. Then he sent us back to Gulfport with some lovely lunch spot restaurant recommendations, namely one called Slap Your Mama, and said he almost couldn't even fathom how we were able to accomplish what we did. Very fortunately for us, the same constable was on duty a few weeks ago when another guy using Google Maps was accidentally directed around the security checkpoint to the location of an old security gate that had been defunct since about the mid-1960s. From what I understand, that guy never managed to actually make it onto the base and only down a shut-down service road where he was caught very suspiciously, but he was also able to prove that his GPS was trying to have him offed. By the grace of God, that afforded us some much-needed credibility to what probably sounded like a pretty effing ridiculous story. My cortisol and adrenaline levels are so high right now that I'm not even sure whether to laugh, cry, or vomit. Happy to be sitting in the rental car en route to lunch instead of waiting in handcuffs for a transfer to a military detainment center for deportation. Too long did not read. Apple Maps gave 3 Canadian tourists directions to inadvertently, unknowingly sneak onto a US military base undetected and received an armed escort off base after ID verification proving we were only clueless museum goers. Sounds like a win-win. You got to see half the museum and a great story. They get to un-FK their base perimeter security to prevent a real threat actor from gaining access. The important thing to remember here is that there's a restaurant called Slap Your Mama and I want details. Killed, not unalived. I wonder if it's an unintended consequence of the routing algorithm. Where there are checkpoints and gates, Apple Maps will note that the driver stopped or even turned around, while your circuitous but uninterrupted route looked like a nice clear run without traffic jams. Alright, this is hilarious. Don't sweat it too much though, no harm done. You got gently redirected off the base, you're not in trouble. Happy adventuring lol. Ever been on a watch list? No? You are now, degree. TIFU. Drunk DM'd classmate asking her on date. Was out and drinking heavily Wednesday night. Ended up bumping into a classmate who I've actually had a crush on for a bit. We talked for a bit then went our separate ways. Later, in my infinite drunken wisdom, I DM'd her my number and asked her on a date and she never answered. Realized that was an awful idea the next morning and deleted everything. It said she didn't view anything, but I did send an apology afterwards, which she also hasn't answered. Going through an awful spiral of worst-case scenarios, being labeled a creep, getting in trouble at school, and can't believe I was so dumb. Dreading going to class Monday and seeing her as well. TLDR. Drunk DM'd classmate asking her on date and she never answered. No idea what she is thinking. You're allowed to put a request for companionship out there without regrets, scissor heart. Just asking her on a date via text doesn't seem like such a big deal. Obviously that could change if there were inappropriate comments or language, but without that I don't see the issue. Just asking someone out once doesn't automatically make you a creep, even if you had been drinking at the time. I'm assuming you're fairly young so I guess I get it to some extent, but man, you shouldn't be having an existential crisis because you asked a girl out on a date. This new generation seems to struggle so much with things we didn't bat an eye about back when we were young. The correct title of your post is, "Today I fucked up by thinking asking someone out is weird and wrong." Bro, she might not have her read receipts turned on, and may therefore have read it. Maybe she was really excited you asked her and just didn't want to reply too fast so that she didn't come off as too eager? I reckon you should have just left the original text, not apologized so fast and waited for a reply. If she says no, then respect that and move on. Delete that apology before she sees it too. No idea why you would apologize for something she didn't even read. The apology would raise more red flags than the date request for me.